Hello and welcome to another episode of FortGuardLIVE. I'm Derek Manky and I'm joined once again. I'm so happy to see you. Aamir Lakhani. How you doing, Aamir?
I'm great, man. How you doing?
I think you're always great, and that's a good thing. Same with me. It's always fun doing this. I find. It's a serious problem that we track in the world of cybercrime, but it keeps things interesting. And we just released our first half 2021 global threat landscape report. There's a lot of data we got to crunch through on any given minute, right? In FortiGuard Labs, you know this firsthand. This is data obviously accumulated for the full first half of 2021. There's a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I love about these threat reports is it gives us like a good idea, a good pulse on what's happening, especially what's like currently happening. It's kind of like the all-star break for me, the all-star game in the NBA. It kind of shows me what the current standings are, where things are about to go, and really where to focus my efforts on.
Yeah, and it's one thing to talk, because as you know, we release things like our threat signals and all these different assets, which are breaking news, proactive research. But it's really interesting when you start to look at trends and data over a 6-month period, because it also gives us an idea where we're heading, right, into the last half of the year too. And not surprisingly, one of the most concerning and lead stories we had from the Threat Landscape Report was, drum roll please, ransomware. We've talked about this problem a lot before, but if we look at the big picture, what's happening with ransomware, there's a lot going on, right? First of all, we observed year over year, so looking a full year of data, a 10.7%, so over 1,000% increase, 10.7-fold increase in ransomware. That's a lot of activity. I know on the second half of 2020 in our threat landscape report, we saw over a 7-fold increase. So the wave was just starting to build Q4 of last year, but it didn't subside. It just kept growing and growing like a snowball effect. And it's a risk as a service models and a lot more, unfortunately, high profile attacks we saw.
Yeah, it's peak infection, I would say, at this point. I mean, there's really no stopping the ball. It seems like it's funny. Like the last couple of years, every time we've done a threat report, ransomware always seems to be like one of the top stories. I would think that, hey, something else is going to happen, and I'm always amazed on like how much more ransomware is occurring. How much more impact it's having on organizations, and just really the pain it's causing everyone in every organization now.
Yeah, and if you look at, I refer to this as sort of the scales of justice, right? If you look at what's happening, if you put risk on one side and everything else on the other, unfortunately, that risk, right, all the activity and the damages, collateral damage that were happening, it just keeps on getting heavier and heavier on that right-hand side, and we need to counterbalance that. That ransom as a service model, it's becoming ludicrous, right? If you look at what cybercriminals are paying out for their affiliates and partners on ransom, it's in excess of 70% as an example, and that unfortunately, that ransom as a service model is starting to apply to more and more cyber gangs too now.
Yeah, ransom as a service is interesting because we've seen it evolve over time as well. I mean, it used to be that ransom as a service, the affiliates used to get like maybe about 20-30% from the threat actors. Now it's almost opposite. The affiliates are getting paid like 70-80% sometimes. And if you think about it, they're doing a lot more of the work. The threat actors have definitely kind of perfected their game in having ransomware that's very effective, that actually propagates very quickly, while the affiliates are very good at initial access, vertical expansion, getting into organizations, figuring out what other vulnerabilities are out there, and exploiting those vulnerabilities and spreading around through domains and third parties and whatever else they need to. So they're taking a lot of, I would say, of the risk and the grunt work, while the threat actors are actually perfecting the software. And it's a partnership that seems to be working pretty well from a standpoint that they seem to be happy with each other and paying each other out a lot of times, at least.
Yeah, and the model keeps evolving too. This is what we saw over the first half. We saw not only the ransom as a service, but I'm talking about the business operations, right? Obviously, we saw Conti and now the infamous cookbook, which was released. It's a fascinating view into the world of, it's actually hard evidence as to how these people are operating and, sort of their modus operandi, their guides, if you will. So they're actually documenting this on their side on the cyber criminals, just shows how organized they are. And then at the same time, they're getting more serious about recruiting too. They're actually targeting employees and people inside of organizations trying to work for them aggressively, which is, I wouldn't say a brand new tactic, but the way how aggressive they're being in this and clever is, I would say.
I think it's surprising people on how organized they are, and we talk about it, but when you see actual documentation, you actually see recruiting efforts on how to basically motivate people inside a network to basically distribute ransomware, and how you see their actual operations playbook on what they're not actually like writing malware, they're not actually just like trying to just infect you with malware, but they're using tools that already exist in your organization. They're using administrative privileges. They're using basically techniques that every organization would probably have to use anyways for any type of administration, and actually taking advantage of that, which we know, we've talked about them doing that, but to actually see them play by play, hey, this is how I manage Active Directory and exploit that. This is how I manage user rights and exploit that. It's kind of interesting, and I think very eye-opening for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you're referring to, of course, are the traditional living off the land attacks. What we're seeing that now in new forms too. So switching gears, the other thing that we saw, and this is also over the first half of 2021, there is a big trend in malvertising. So web-borne traffic. This is the whole theme of the edge, right? Threats being pushed more to the edge. That edge being sort of redefined every day. It continues to expand in terms of attacks that are targeting the work from home, work from anywhere environment. We've talked about that in the past, but we certainly saw it in the landscape report. 1 in 4 organizations detected web-borne malvertising, so things like heavily obfuscated JavaScript, even scare tactics, right? New versions of scareware, not the binaries that we're running on systems, but scare techniques, impersonations of technical support systems and IT staff as an example too. And we also saw botnets as well continue to be pushed out into these environments, specifically IoT.
Yeah, so the edge is traditionally being defined as like that kind of that barrier between your own network, your LAN, and the internet access. And that's just faded away, right? We have cloud services, we have mobile services, we have web services. So there is no edge anymore because everyone's living on the edge. How about that? Yeah, because we're accessing the internet in all sorts of manners, like with IoT devices, with all these other devices as well. But that means that these attacks can basically come from anywhere, anytime to us, and they can come in the forms of like web scripts and malvertising and pretty much any other way we access the internet, and that's kind of scary. And attackers are definitely taking advantage of that and figuring out, like, even if they have one way into your organization, they're landing and expanding. They're moving horizontally throughout the network and saying, even if I can only access you through an IoT device, how can I take that and maybe obtain a more valuable target?
Yeah, and the other thing is the vector, right? Just because a lot of this is outbound threats, right? So systems that are going to websites, and unfortunately, we're still seeing those environments that are not segmented or secure the way they should be. And you have a lot of these outbound threats going to these rogue sites, or in some cases even watering hole sites, so regular sites that they visit that become infected. Again, easy way to land and expand on this living on the edge, as everyone is doing, as you said. The other thing was with botnets too. So what we saw this year was Mirai. Mirai, of course, was one of the first IoT-based botnets. It's been around for a while. It surged into the number one botnet that we've seen in terms of prevalence for the first half of 2021. So IoT botnets are here to stay. It seems like this is definitely a preferred tactic. And that's, again, I wouldn't say it's a big surprise, but it's the new reality, right? It's Mirai's consistently been growing, but now it exists. And this is just another example of living where it can actually live on IoT devices that are sitting in these, in these work from home or work from anywhere environments too.
Yeah, remember when Mirai first came out? It was infecting, your traditional consumer devices. What I would say, consumer devices that people would be using at home, and a lot of people didn't notice that they were infected with like a botnet like Mirai because they were doing everything correctly, right? But that botnet was basically used as a source to attack other people. I think Mirai was actually responsible for that giant DNS takedown that took down or appeared to take down a lot of the internet. Years ago.
A while ago, yeah.
think we all remember that. And that's the problem with botnets, is that not only does it infect your system, but it's used as a potential jumping point to infect other systems. The other thing I think we've seen that changed is botnets are now more sophisticated, because first of all, the Mirai botnet, the source code had leaked on the internet like years ago. So everyone's taking that source code and saying like, hey, how can I improve upon that? And that's not from a good place, right? They're saying, how can I improve upon that to make it more evil, essentially? And what they've done is, with a lot of other botnets, is they've used that as a content delivery network. They're basically using the botnet to carry other types of malware, specifically ransomware in a lot of cases, but it can be other types of malware, such as rootkits and backdoors and keyloggers and whatever else.
Yeah, definitely. Not only content delivery, but drop sites too, right? So places they can actually host stolen files and not legally be responsible, because they're actually putting the legal responsibility on the people where they're, dropping these malicious files, malicious files.
Exactly. It's the victim may not even know they have.
Yeah, which is a big issue. And you think about how wide that net is. So first of all, in the botnet activity, what we saw in the threat landscape report was that there's over a 50% jump on just in the first half in terms of organizations that were detecting botnet activity too. That's already a big jump, and that's going to continue to grow, I suspect, with IoT, like botnets like Mirai and IoT driving this. The other thing is, we always talk about Mirai, but certainly I expect a lot more of IoT-based botnets to come on the radar too. We did see that happening with TrickBot. It was actually using IoT devices for command and control, and TrickBot was interesting because we actually highlighted it in the landscape report. It came back. So for those of you who might not be aware, or if you can remember, in the last half of 2020, in about Q4, there was a takedown attempt on TrickBot. It went offline for a while, and we saw it come back in about Q2. It's, when these things come back online, we're starting to see them take different forms, right? They basically go back to the drawing board, refactor a bit, come up with another game plan, and then come out of the gates again. So it's interesting to see that with TrickBot.
Yeah, I think that's not surprising. Once again, attackers are always going back to the drawing board, seeing what worked, like modifying their code. A lot of times, as I said, that code is usually freely available, or at least other code that's very similar that they can modify and sometimes use as a proof of concept, sometimes used for learning purposes. But at the same time, attackers are like, what can I do with this and actually make this like work better for me?
Yeah, definitely. And if we look at, botnets, so TrickBot was one of those that was taken offline. Motet was another, which was, multilateral, collaborative takedown attempt. There's a lot of good things happening there. But there are, at the end of the day, and it's clearly shown in our threat landscape report, there's so many of these still and so much activity that we're seeing that attack surface is big. And botnets, again, at the end of the day, a botnet is about having command and control, being able to remotely operate, compromise own devices and be able to exfiltrate data. That's the name of the game. I mean, that's really the essence and heart and soul of cybercrime. And so I expect that, we're always going to be able to see a lot of this activity. It's just interesting to see how they're adapting to new technologies like this.
Yeah, I think you're articulating that really well. I think the difference between what I would define a botnet today versus even a couple of years ago is the botnet today is the foundation for attackers to carry out other types of attacks as well. Yeah. So you're right. It is the command and control. A lot of times it is, as soon as a botnet connections are established, they have shell access to a system. They have access to upload more code or run other types of commands, or even try and start disabling things like Windows Defender or UAC or other types of security mitigation tools that might be on the system as well.
Yeah, definitely. And, apart from the offense from cybercriminals, the other thing that's interesting now, and this is brand new in the first half 2021 report, is we're able to actually start to show dynamic data of what I'm calling high resolution threat intelligence. So looking at MITRE ATT&CK TTP data, so techniques, tactics, procedures, not just things like we highlight the botnet and, virus activity and exploit activity, all these things that we've called out, but zooming in with a microscope onto this, right? Looking at how, what's the preferred method that attackers are doing to actually do, lateral movement on systems to try to actually, execute code, do privilege escalation and things like that. And techniques like privilege escalation as well too. So it's pretty interesting to see those. And there's a lot of different tools they have to be able to do this.
Yeah, no, Derek, I'm glad you pointed that out. And I would encourage all the readers that are reading the threat report, the Fortinet threat report, to look at that section, because me as a researcher, I find it really interesting to not only look at the techniques that attackers are using, but what the likelihood of those techniques are in a real-time threat. So, I mean, I know they're using a number of techniques, but what is the likelihood of this technique that they're using? So I know this is where I need to concentrate my efforts. As a defender, this is where I probably need to stop an attacker from infiltrating my organization, or as a researcher, this is what I need to really look out for and see if I can find these type of signatures or these type of attacks. And to me, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and this is ongoing work, that we're also doing in the industry. So we're working with the MITRE Center for Tech and Foreign Defense, MITRE Ingenuity, with the Sightings Ecosystem Project as an example. But at FortiGuardLIVE, we've been able to implement this and actually show this data in the Threat Landscape Report. And it's useful because it helps to prioritize response. It helps to put a spotlight onto the ones, as you just said, what are the ones that I should actually be looking at first. If you look at MITRE ATT&CK and TTPs, there's well over 200 of these, right? And if we start to look at different verticals, different regions, and all the different techniques that attackers are using, it really helps to be able to look at the ones that we're seeing the heavy activity on first, because then you can start to actually understand what I call the digital DNA. Again, it's like this microscope on the cyber criminals themselves, and it's interesting to start seeing that data.
It is, and one of the things is when you see a certain technique being used over and over again, even when there's multiple techniques available in a single attack stream, it makes you think, like, why is an attacker actually going for that technique over and over again? Is it because it's more impactful, or is it because no one's noticing and it's just like that easy and that successful for them to go after that over and over again? And that is kind of scary, but that's also kind of food for thought for organizations, especially when coming up with a defensive strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Food for thought. It's a reality as well too. Being able to look at it's really that we talk about the low hanging fruit a lot of the times, and I think it just reaffirms that, right, when we start looking at it, because we do actually see that pattern repeating. Because again, if an attack is successful, they often won't need to change their tactics until the attack becomes unsuccessful. In other words, organizations start to understand that and have the proper safeguards and security controls in place.
I agree. Let's give them some high hanging fruit. Let's make the hacker get a ladder or something.
Yeah, and that's the name of the game, right? That's why we're doing this. Obviously, is to expose that and to try to make it harder for the attackers. It's all about making it more expensive for cyber criminals to operate, like we talk about. But it's really key to be able to look at this in this high resolution under the microscope and really to show dynamic data with that. So really exciting stuff. You can check that out on the latest version of the Threat Landscape Report. There's some data on that, figures along with everything else that we talked about. And for further updates on this and anything that we're doing from the labs in terms of threat research, you can go to blog.fortinet.com under threat research. You can find all the details from the report there as well too. Aamir, thanks for joining me again. It's always great talking to you. This is Derek Manky with FortiGuardLIVE. Thank you.